Good evening, everyone. This week's Parsha is Parshas Noach, and this Drasha has been sponsored by Dr. Richard Brown in memory of his father, Yisrael ben Moshe Eliezer HaKohen, and it's been sponsored by Phyllis Medoff in memory of her father, Zavel ben Benzion. When Avraham met his great-great-great-grandfather, Noach, what do you think he asked him? So we would have thought that he asked him, what was it like being on the table? What was it like being on the ark? But that's not what he asked him. The Medrash tells us that when he met Noach, he asked Noach, by what merit did he survive the flood? And Noach's response was that he merited to be saved because of the fact that he fed the animals on the ark with complete and total dedication. 24-hour, 24/7 job, feeding every single human creature in the world. A demand of taking care of the animals to the point that the Medrash tells us that Noach was once late to feed a lion, and the lion maimed him. That was the level of chesed, of kindness, that was demanded of him. One time late, and the lion punishes him. How should we understand this merit? How is it that this merit of caring for the animals, the merit that saved him from the flood? So the Michtam Eliyahu explains in the following way. At the beginning of the parsha, when Hashem tells Noach to build the ark, so Hashem says to Noach, Kates kol basar ba'lefanai, the end of all flesh has come before me. Ki mala'ah ha'aretz chamas mipneihem, because the land has been filled with thievery because of them. So if we read these words, the words strongly imply that why did the flood come? Because of the chamas, because of the rampant thievery, the rampant taking that was going on. So if the flood comes because of taking, says the Michtam Eliyahu, then that means that the flood is a result of that rampant taking. And the flood being a result of that rampant taking is really meant to say, when a person becomes so selfish and so self-centered that they just take and take and take, they bring destruction upon themselves. The flood was a result of their selfishness, of their rampant taking. And that's really a symbol that when a person falls into that kind of state of rampant taking to the point of stealing at all means, but it's just all about taking, then that brings destruction upon oneself. So if the destruction of the flood came because of rampant taking, so now to merit, to be able to be protected from that, in order to be protected from the result of rampant taking, to be protected from that, one has to now do the opposite. Have to go to the other extreme. They have to go to the level of rampant, so to speak, or ultimate giving. If ultimate taking, rampant taking, brings the flood, and again, the flood was what we call Midas Hadin, the attribute of Hashem's justice, which was engulfing the entire world, which should have engulfed Noach, which should have engulfed and destroyed his ark. His ark shouldn't have been strong enough to be able to withstand these waters. The merit that was able to protect him from the flood was the opposite of what brought the flood. What brought the flood was rampant taking. What protects from the flood is extreme giving. Extreme taking brought the flood. Extreme giving now is the protection from the flood. And therefore, Noach had to be involved in taking care of the animals, in giving and caring 24/7. And the demand, the level of kindness, of giving that was necessary to be protected from the destruction of the extreme taking was so extreme that any kind of let up in it, any kind of weakening in it, weakened the protection. Noach's level of extreme giving, of extreme care, extreme chesed, that he had to display in order to be protected from the results of the extreme taking, was an extreme level of giving, of caring. And once that level got less, somewhere or another it lessened, the protection lessened. He was late to give the lion its food. That means he didn't live up to the level of giving. So that means that he wasn't giving at the level that he needed to be protected, and therefore he was maimed. To be protected from this attribute of judgment, from this destruction that was coming, was demanded a tremendously high level of giving. Once Noach slipped from that, Noach fell from that. So now the result of that was a certain level of destruction on his part. He became maimed. Because the only way to be protected at this time of extreme judgment, at this time of extreme destruction that came from rampant taking, that level of giving that could protect was so high, the demand was so great, that once he didn't live up to that, even in a small way, so at a certain level he lost the merit for protection, and therefore he was maimed. So the Mechel is explaining that the way to understand how Noach was saved, the merit being saved from the flood that came about from giving to the animals, is understood in a very specific way, in a way that's very specific to the situation that Noach was in. Noach had to be protected from a flood that came from rampant taking. He could only be protected through extreme giving. Extreme taking brought the destruction of the flood. The only way to be protected from that was extreme giving. At the same time, we do find a very important concept that chesed, that kindness in general, has the power to protect, which also could be a way of explaining what was the merit of taking care of the animals, how to protect him. Because kindness has the ability to protect. And we see this in a very fascinating way in the Medrash regarding the Jewish people at the time that they were being enslaved in Egypt. So there is a Medrash of Tana de Beliyahu that says the following: when the Jewish people were in Egypt, they all gathered together. Because they were all united as one. And they made a pact with each other. That they would do kindness with one another. Mentions other things that was part of this pact. But the first thing mentioned is part of this pact that they made in Egypt was to do kindness with each other. So the Chavetz Chaim explains that that the understanding of this pact that they made with each other for kindness works in the following way. The Jewish people understood what was happening. They understood that slavery was about to begin. They understood they were now in for the long haul, or for a very difficult state of slavery and pain and suffering, of exile. And therefore they understood that they needed a merit. They needed a merit by which to arouse Hashem's kindness and mercy for them. So they understood that if they will commit to being kind with one another, then that will be a merit for Hashem to respond in kind and to be kind and merciful to them. That's what they understood. Now is the time to make that pact of kindness with one another, because they understood if they'll be kind with one another, Hashem will be kind with them. And they'll be able to survive the slavery and be freed from it. So here we see this idea that kindness has the power to protect. The Jewish people invoked that power to protect themselves during the slavery, and that should be a merit for them to be redeemed and protected because of the kindness they made with each other. So here we see this idea, this concept, that kindness has the ability to protect us. Now, once we're on this topic of kindness, I'd like to spend a little bit of time on chesed and share with you a very beautiful parable that I saw. The parable goes of a person who one time had a dream, and in the dream he saw himself standing in front of a table full of delicious food. And he looked at all the people sitting at the table, and he saw they were just staring at the food, and they looked very drawn and hungry. So he turned to them and said, "Why isn't anybody here eating?" And the answer they gave was that all the people at the table have no joints. Have no joints. So if they stick out their hand to take the food, they can't bring it back to eat. So they're stuck. They're sitting at the table, but they can't feed themselves. That's why they're sitting there staring and all drawn and all upset. The man walks away from the table, comes back a bit later, and everybody's smiling and happy and satisfied. And he asked them, "What happened?" And they said they figured out that although when they take the food in their hands, they can't bring it back to themselves, but they could give it to the person across from them. So they figured out that if they can give to each other, and that way they'll be happy and satisfied. I'll give to the person across from me, and he'll give me. I'm across from him. So because by giving him, he now gives to me. That is a parable for kindness. Not that we do kindness so that we should get something back, but it's important to know that Hashem tells us that when we do a chesed, when we do a kindness, through that kindness, we will receive kindness back. That's the mashal, that's the parable. They figured out that by giving to each other, that's how they'll gain. And there is a pasuk in Koheles, the book of Koheles, Ecclesiastes, that reads the following. And for some of you, this may be a review of something we spoke about over Yontif, but the pasuk in Koheles, this is Parakid Aleph, chapter 11, pasuk Aleph, verse 1. Shlach lachmacha al pnei hamayim, send your bread forth upon the waters, for after many days he will find it. What does this mean? So Rashi explains the following. When the verse says, send your bread forth upon the waters, Asay Taiva B'Chesed, Rashi says it's the Torah that the Sefer, the book of Koheles is telling us. Do goodness and kindness with a person, that your heart is going to tell you, Al Terenu Oid, you're not going to see him anymore. Like someone who throws his food onto the water. Meaning, the person needs your help. You're going to help him, you're never going to see him again. That means he'll never reciprocate. You'll never get a favor back from him. And the pasuk is addressing that situation. Send your bread upon the water means that your heart is telling you that by helping this person, it's like I'm just taking the food and throwing it on the water. It's going to carry it away. I'm going to lose it. Here too, you're going to help this person. It's going to be a loss. And the answer is, says Koheles, send your bread on the water. Do what looks like you're throwing it away, so to speak. Because in many days, you'll find it again. There will be a time, your payment will come back. Cast the bread upon the water. It'll come back. When you think that you're throwing away something, your money, your food, because of the kindness you're doing right now, because you're doing kindness with a person you'll never see again, it's going to come back. You're going to get your reward. And again, this is something that we find that the Torah is trying to encourage us. Torah knows what kind of inner struggles we go through when it's a question of giving up of our own for someone else. The Torah says, don't look at it that it's a loss. Time will pass. The time will come, and you'll get your payment back for it. I'd like to share with you a beautiful story. This story comes from a book. Maybe many of you have read it. It's called Small Miracles. And the story is told like this. Of course, the names are changed. But the story is told of a man named David Brody from Montreal, who used to every month drive from Montreal to New York for business. He didn't like flying. He enjoyed driving. So he drove it. 7-hour trip, something he did in one shot. Did it, of course, he did it at night. There was no one on the road. No problem with traffic. Always took a nice long nap before he left. Of course, had coffee with him in the car. And one night, he decided that it was time to go ahead and drive to New York, and he left. And this was something he'd been doing for many years already, for 10 years, and never experienced any problems. But one night, it was May of 1996, he's an hour into his drive, and he can't keep his eyes open. He is aching from head to toe with tiredness. He can't move. He opens the windows, get a blast of fresh air. He takes a big drink of coffee, not helping, nothing doing. He just can't stay up. So he was an hour into his trip. He was in and he had to decide he's going to get off by the next exit, find a gas station that's open, and see if he could find a hotel or motel to rent to take a room. So he finds himself in some, finds himself in a, driving into a, just 1 second, make sure I got the right, finds himself in some village in upstate New York, never noticed it in all his years driving by, and he finds an open gas station in the middle of the night. Gas attendant, nice and friendly, helpful. What can I do for you? He says, are there any hotels or motels in the area? The man says, sure, I have a whole list of them. I'll make some phone calls for you. We'll get you a room. Very good. The man starts calling the hotels and motels. Booked solid. Says, that's really strange. Not even vacation time yet, but everybody's booked solid. So David says to him, is there maybe a college, a dormitory high school that I can rent a room? He says, can't think of any. In desperation, David says, is there some kind of maybe a nursing home around here that has an extra bed? I'll pay for it. And the attendant says, right down, not far from here, there's a nursing home owned by a man named Patrick Riley. He's a very nice guy. I'm sure if there is a room, he'll rent your room. Okay? Calls up Patrick Riley. Gas attendant calls him up. He says, yes, there's a room available. David goes there, gets a good night's sleep, all ready and refreshed to leave the next day, pays the, rent for the room, and he walks out the door of the nursing home. And just then he makes a U-turn, comes back inside, goes over to Mr. Riley and says to him, besides being a businessman, I'm also an ordained rabbi. Are there any Jewish patients here that I could help out, do a good deed before I leave? And the owner of the nursing home, this Patrick Riley, says, it's kind of strange that you should ask that. There was one Jewish patient here, but he died last night, just about the time that you came here. So what are you planning to do about a funeral for this man? Asked David. Well, said the owner of the nursing home, this man, Samuel Weinstein, was close to 100 years old. He outlived all his relatives. He had no next of kin listed on his documents, and he died penniless. There's no Jewish cemetery around here. Closest one, I think, is in Albany, and that's about 100 miles away. So we just figured we buried him in our local Christian cemetery, which has a pauper's field reserved for these kinds of people. Listen, David said urgently, it's very nice of you, but this man was Jewish. I'm sure he would want to have a Jewish burial. So David said like this, I happen to have my station wagon here with me. I usually drive my Corolla. This time I took my station wagon. I have enough room in the back for a coffin. Could you arrange to release the body to me, and I'll take it with New York to me for a Jewish burial? And that's what happened. The body was released to David, and off he went, trying to bury this man in the back of a station wagon. And he went to the Chevra Kadisha, to the Burial Society in different parts of New York. They couldn't help him. One of them remembered that there's a Chevra Kadisha Burial Society in Washington Heights, the Washington Heights section in Upper Manhattan. And he remembered they have an arrangement for such people. Okay. So David goes to Washington Heights, finds the office of the Chevra Kadisha, tells him the story, and the man says, yes, we do have. About 50 years ago, a wealthy Jewish man in our community was concerned that there may be Jews that will die penniless and not have a place to be buried, and therefore he created a fund specifically for that. And he says, in our cemetery, we have plots designated for destitute people. So we can accommodate this. Okay. The man takes out a piece of paper and he needs to start filling out some information. He says to David, what is this deceased man's name? And David answers, Samuel Weinstein. Says the director. That name sounds very familiar. Now, this part of the story sounds a little bit strange to me, but he says, mind if I take a look at the body? Goes to the back of the station wagon, comes back in. He has a tear on his cheek, and he says, my dear friend, not only will we be happy to give Samuel Weinstein a plot in our cemetery, we will give him a place of honor. God's ways are indeed mysterious, my friend. The man in the back of your station wagon happens to be none other than the very same philanthropist who originally established the Free Burial Fund. He will be laid to rest in the cemetery plot he himself purchased. Your journey was long and arduous, Mr. Brody, but through your most commendable efforts, Samuel Weinstein has indeed been returned to his rightful place. That is an example of cast your bread upon the waters. Made this fund for people who died, who had nothing. It was all about giving to these people and no question of ever getting anything back. But it came back. It came back when it was really needed. And that's the idea here. The idea here is that a person does a kindness, it comes back. We don't do it for that purpose. But the Torah, our sages, make sure that we know and understand that our kindnesses come back. Our kindnesses come back to take care of us. When we're kind with others, Hashem is kind with us. So Noach's merit to be saved, according to Mechem Leo, was very specific in the context of what was going on. Extreme taking brought the flood. Extreme giving protects from the flood. We could also say that the kindness that Noach did was a merit of protection, because kindness, as we see from what happened before this enslavement with the Jewish people in Egypt, they committed to kindness, because if we're kind with others, Hashem is kind with us. Noach was in a very serious state. He needed a tremendous amount of kindness and mercy from Hashem. That came about because of the tremendous kindness that he did for the animals. And as Koheles tells us, that even if we think that the kindness that we're doing is something that it's going to be lost, so to speak, we're going to help a person that deep down we say to ourselves, I'll never get anything back for it. Always remember that a kindness is never just kind of thrown into the water, cast upon the waters, but rather, with time, the kindness will come back, because the kindness that we show to others is the kindness that Hashem shows to us. Have a wonderful Shabbos.